Well, hello, Sixpenny First School. It's great to be able to talk with you. It seems really some time since I was in your assembly hall, and if you remember, I was telling you the story of Joseph and his technicoloured dream coat. But then we got to the lockdown, and school finished early, and we had the Easter holidays. And I know lots of you now aren't physically back at school, but you're sort of having your lessons at home and you're watching things on the internet. So I spoke to your head teacher the other day, and I said, would you like me to do one of my Bible stories so that the children at Sixpenny Handley First School can maybe watch them online. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going to record a story now, and hopefully you can watch it and hopefully you enjoy it. And I hope it's not too long before we're all back together in school and I can come into assembly and tell some more of my stories in my particular funny way as people like. Now, I hope you had a good Easter holiday. I hope you got lots of Easter eggs, but didn't eat too much chocolate all in one go. So the story I want to tell you about this morning is actually, it's one of the stories the church often tells after Easter, because it's a story about Jesus. If you remember, at Easter, we think about Jesus who died on the cross, and then on Easter Sunday we celebrate that he rose again to life and he appeared to lots of his disciples. Now, this particular story, I like to nickname it BBQ on the Beach. And I thought that was particularly appropriate because I don't know about you, one of the things I really missed about not being able to go out from our homes or too far from our homes is to be able to go down to our beaches, which if you live in and around Handley, they're not very far away, about half an hour's drive or so. And normally over the Easter holidays, I would have gone down to the beach with my family and enjoyed all the lovely sunny weather, but we haven't been able to do it. And you may have also had a barbecue. Some of us have been able to do that maybe in our gardens, but we haven't been able to go out and about and do a barbecue. So here's a story about a barbecue and a beach that involves Jesus after the first Easter. Now, Jesus' friends, who you remember were called the disciples, they felt really sad. They were so sad because they had seen their friend and master Jesus. He had died and everything seemed to have gone wrong. Their whole lives had changed. Nothing quite seemed the same. They were also frightened because they were worried that the same people that came to get Jesus might come and get them. So they didn't quite know what to do. They were all quite scared. If you remember, some of Jesus' friends who were called disciples, they had other jobs before they started to follow Jesus, and quite a few of them were fishermen, particularly one person, Peter. Peter was a Galilean fisherman, and that meant he was very strong. He was quite creative. He had a lot of courage, but he used to talk a lot, and sometimes he would talk without thinking. That was often his mistake. But he was feeling particularly bad because, sadly, what had happened is that when Jesus was arrested, he betrayed his friend. Several people asked him if he knew Jesus, and he said, "No, I don't know Jesus. No, I've never heard of him at all. No, don't know the man, don't ask me any questions." And Jesus had told him that he would do that 3 times before the cock crowed in the morning, and he did. And he felt terrible. I don't know if you've ever done that. Have you ever betrayed a friend or fallen out with a friend and you feel really bad about it inside because they are your friend and you wish maybe you hadn't said the thing or done the thing that you were going to do? That's how Peter felt. Anyhow, Peter decided everything had changed. Nothing was going to be the way it was. So he decided to go and do what he knew best, fishing. And some of the other disciples came with him. So he went back to his fishing boat on Lake Galilee. He set it all up, pushed it out from the shore, put the sails up and got the nets ready. And off he went. All the disciples were very silent in the boat. They didn't really know what to say to each other. They were so sad and unhappy. So Peter just carried on, and he told the disciples how to get the nets ready. And then when they got the boat to the centre of the lake, a place where he normally knew there were loads of fish, and he thought, great, we'll catch lots of fish, and that'll be good. It was evening time because fishermen often go out at night, and sometimes they put lights on the boats because that makes the fish swim to the surface. So they did all of that, and then they took their nets and they threw them out into the lake, and they cast their nets. And Peter waited the normal amount of time, and then he said to the disciples, right, pull the nets in, pull the nets in. So they heaved and they pulled the nets in and they pulled the nets in, and eventually they gathered all the nets. But there was no fish. They hadn't caught a single thing. As if things weren't bad enough, as if they weren't feeling sad and miserable and upset because they'd lost their friend. Now Peter had gone back to do something he knew about, which was fishing, and he hadn't caught a single fish. Now, the other thing Peter could suffer from was he could be very grumpy. And when he pulled that net in, he started to get grumpy. He said, I've fished here hundreds of times. I know this lake. I know this water. I can't understand it, why there's no fish. And then he started to blame the other disciples. It must be you lot. You didn't put the net out in the proper way I told you. So they tried again. They threw the nets out into the water. And the same thing happened again and again and again. They'd been fishing all night long and they hadn't caught a fish. They caught an odd shoe. They caught a piece of wood. They caught some seaweed, but not a single fish. By then, Peter was particularly grumpy. He was walking up and down his little boat going, I don't know why I haven't caught any fish. It must be you lot. You're all bad luck. I'm a brilliant fisherman. I've caught fish all my life. My father taught me to caught fish. My grandfather taught me to catch fish. His grandfather taught me to catch fish. I know everything about catching fish. It must be your fault. The other disciples thought, oh gosh, Peter's in a terrible mood. Let's not upset him anymore. So they moved to the other end of the boat. Slowly, the sun started to rise on Lake Galilee, and they could see the shore. The boat had drifted in because there was a slight breeze, and they could just see the beach in the distance. It was empty. And then one of the other disciples, John, he strained his eyes in the morning light and he rubbed them and he looked into the distance. And he was sure he could see somebody walking along the beach. And he just seemed to recognise him. As the boat moved a bit closer to the shore, John looked again. And yes, he couldn't believe it. It can't be. It was Jesus walking along the beach. How could it possibly be Jesus? John had seen him die. John had seen him be buried. But he'd heard about this fact that Jesus had come back to life. He looked even harder. And yes, he was sure it was Jesus. At this point, the figure on the beach stopped and called out to the disciples in the boat. Hello, ahoy over there! Ahoy! Ahoy! Peter looked at the funny little man on the beach and said, what's that crazy man doing on the beach, waving his hands and shouting at us at this time in the morning? Who does he think he is? What's he saying? And Jesus said to them, cast your nets on the other side of the boat. One of the disciples said to Peter, I think he's telling us to cast our nets, but on the different side of the boat. Ooh, that wasn't a good thing to say to Peter. Because Peter, as I said, he knew everything about fishing. If you wanted to meet Peter Cross, try telling him about fishing. Because he thought he knew everything about fishing. So this wasn't going to go down well. Peter looked at the disciple and said, are you telling me that funny man on the beach is telling me, Peter, captain of this boat, fisherman who has been bred over generations, how to fish, telling me to cast my net on the other side of the boat? I won't have it. I know everything about fishing. Look at him, standing on the shore telling me how to fish. What does he know? And one of the other disciples said, well, Peter, in fairness, We haven't caught anything all night. We've been trying again and again and again. Peter nearly exploded. Don't tell me what we've caught and what we haven't caught. I know exactly what we've caught and what we haven't caught. We've caught a bit of wood, a bit of seaweed and an old shoe, and it's all your fault. Then one of the other disciples, John, said, look, Peter, what harm can it do? Let's try doing it again. So Peter said, well, you can throw the nets out. I'm not doing it. He was very grumpy, Peter. So they got the nets and they did what the man on the shore was saying, and they cast the nets on the other side. They didn't have to wait too long, because as they slowly started to pull the nets in, they could suddenly see on the surface the water going blip, 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 blip. Lots of little fishies and tails were all splashing around, and they pulled the net in. There were so many fish in the net, it was unbelievable. They could hardly get the net into the boat. As they were pulling the net, the boat started to lean over as if it was going to sink. Then John, as the boat had got closer to the shore, he was absolutely sure it was Jesus standing there. And he looked at Peter and he said, Peter, do you know who it is standing on the beach? Oh, I know, it's somebody telling me how to fish, and I'm not very happy about that. John said, look, have a look. So Peter strained his eyes in the morning light and looked, and suddenly he realised it was Jesus, his friend. Now, Peter did something very funny at this point, which has always made me laugh when I've read about it, because he was like fishing in his underpants because he didn't want to get his clothes wet, a bit like wearing your swimming trunks. They didn't have swimming trunks in those days, so he was standing in his pants fishing. But what he did is he put his cloak back on, his sort of clothes, and then he jumped into the sea. I've never heard anything so silly at all. Why would you put your clothes on and jump in the sea? Anyhow, that's Peter for you. So he put his clothes on, jumped in the sea and swam to the shore. And sure enough, when he got there, it was Jesus. At one level, Peter was absolutely thrilled to see Jesus. He couldn't believe it. He thought Jesus had gone, but no, there he was, standing in front of him. But at the same time, Peter felt really bad, because he knew only a few days ago that he'd betrayed his friend. When people had asked him if he knew Jesus, if he was one of his disciples, Peter had gone, no, I don't know him. No, never seen the man. Don't ask me. He denied him completely. He felt so guilty. Jesus had done a barbecue. On the beach, there was a little charcoal fire with some stones round it. And he said to Peter, go and get me some of the fish. So Peter went down and he grabbed the huge net full of fish and he dragged it onto the shore. Jesus took some of the fish and he barbecued it. If you've never tried barbecued fish, particularly on a beach, I can thoroughly recommend it. It's delicious. Anyhow, they ate the barbecued fish for breakfast. And then Peter was very quiet. He didn't know what to say to Jesus because he felt so bad that he denied him and betrayed him. Finally, Jesus turned to Peter. And Jesus said, Peter, am I your best buddy? Am I your best mate? And Peter said, yes, Jesus, of course you're my best buddy. You are my best mate. He said, look after my sheep. Peter thought to himself, okay. And then Jesus said again, Peter, are you my absolute bestie? Are you my bestie matey? Are you my friend above all friends, my best friend? And Peter said, yes, Jesus, you know I'm your best friend. He said, feed my sheep. And then Jesus asked him a third time and said, Peter, are you absolutely, fingers crossed and your toes, my absolute bestest mate, my best friend of all time? Peter got on his knees in front of Jesus and said, Jesus, yes, you're my absolute best friend. And then Jesus smiled at Peter. You see, Jesus had asked him 3 times if he was his best friend because Peter had denied that he was his friend 3 times. And that's a wonderful thing about Jesus, because he forgave Peter. He said, it's all right. I know you messed up, but we all mess up from time to time. And what Jesus was actually saying to Peter, it wasn't that Jesus had a load of sheep. Jesus was talking about you and I. When we talk about Jesus' flock, we talk about all the people of the world. And what Jesus was saying was preparing Peter to go out with the disciples and to tell everybody about how much God and Jesus loved them. Well, that's exactly what happened. And that's another complete story that I'll save for another day. But that's my story of Jesus and the barbecue on the beach, and how Peter was forgiven for betraying his friend. So I hope you enjoyed that story, and I hope you're enjoying school at home and all the things that you're learning, and I'll have another story for you soon. So take care, everyone, and God bless.